Excellent. All
Mhm.
right, it is now 6:30, so we will begin. Hello, welcome to today's webinar, 2024 Gardening Trends. My name is Deborah, and I'm a volunteer at the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. Today's presenter is Mary Schier. If you are not a member of MSHS, now is a good time to join. Members receive not only our award-winning magazine, but also discounts at nurseries and greenhouses, free tickets to our local home show, free webinars, and more. Your membership dollars also allow us to bring great programming like this to all of you. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. You are listening to the webinar in listen-only mode. So you'll be able to hear our presenter, but we cannot hear you. That way there won't be background noise. You will receive an email with a link to a copy of the recording of this webinar within 7 business days after we finish here tonight. There will be a handout with all of the plant names on it sent out with the link to the recording of the webinar. You will also receive a survey. We would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. If you have questions or comments for our presenter, you can type those in on the panel on the right side of your screen. We will be covering questions at the end. If you do not see the panel, excuse me, look for an orange arrow in the upper right corner of your screen. Click on that arrow and it will pop out the panel. Please join me in welcoming today's presenter. Mary Schier is the author of The Northern Gardener, From Apples to Zinnias, 150 Years of Garden Wisdom. She edited Northern Gardener magazine from 2005 to 2023. Her
Mhm.
website, mynortherngarden.com, offers advice for cold climate gardeners, and she frequently posts on Instagram as mynortherngarden_Mary. Take it away, Mary.
Okay, well, thank you, Deborah, and thank you all for coming out or coming to your computer for tonight's program. Really glad to talk about gardening trends for the Minnesota Horticultural Society. As Deborah mentioned, I worked for the Hort Society as editor of Northern Gardener magazine for 18 years, so a long time. It's a wonderful organization. I enjoyed every minute of working for them. And I really encourage you to join if you're not a member, or if you know a young gardener who would benefit from all the information in Northern Gardener magazine and all the programs the Hort Society offers. Now's a great time to give them a gift. We even have a digital membership for those who don't like to mess with paper. So let's get talking on tonight's, oops, just a second. There we go. Let's get talking about garden trends for 2024. Um, I always like to tell people this is a great time to be a gardener. We have more sources of information, more different plants for different types of climates, more plants that work in our cold climate than ever before. It's just a wonderful, wonderful time to be a gardener. And it is really interesting that, during the pandemic, there was a big increase in the number of people who took up gardening. Most of the surveys say it was about 18 million people that took up gardening, and many of them are sticking with it. Not everybody, but a lot of people discovered what I think we gardeners already know, which is that, in a world that sometimes seems pretty darn crazy, gardening is so good for you. It's good for your physical health. It's good for your mental health. It's good for the health of your community. It's good for your spiritual health. Everything about gardening is good for you, except maybe lifting bags of mulch. That sometimes can hurt your back, but the rest of it is just great for you. And I was thrilled. I mean, it's really the one silver lining in the pandemic is how many people decided to start gardening then. The other thing that's great news about gardening is that more young people are embracing gardening. And they say it's somewhere about 35% of those who are in the millennial generation, which are people maybe 28 to 41 or 42, and another 30% of people who are in Generation Z, which are even younger. And so it's obvious that gardening's benefits are becoming well known, and more people are getting interested in it. The last thing that makes it great to garden, as I mentioned before, is there are just more resources and inspiration for gardeners than ever before. The only downside to all that inspiration and resources is you can be kind of overwhelmed by it. And I will say that's one of the good things about the Hort Society, because they give you accurate information for our zone, for our climate, and it's vetted information. So check that out for good sources of information. I also think there's a little too much inspiration sometimes around for gardeners. You can get overwhelmed by all the pretty pictures and fancy videos on TikTok and Instagram. So turn that off sometimes and just go out and enjoy the beauty that's your own garden. So what is driving the trends that we're going to see here in 2024? There's just two really big things. One is the changing climate. Supposedly 2023 is the hottest year ever recorded. So there's a lot of concern about climate. There's a lot of concern about loss of habitat. There's just a greater environmental awareness about use of plastics, about what's happening to birds and bees. And this is really driving a lot of the trends we're seeing in gardening. The second big driver behind garden trends is changing housing patterns. I don't think it's new news to anyone that the last couple of years we've seen a big increase in inflation. Housing prices have gone up, interest rates have gone up. But even before that started, we had a lack of house building. So we actually have a real shortage of housing in this country, especially affordable housing. The result is more people are staying in apartments longer than they might otherwise. More people are in condos, more people are in townhouses. So they're in they have smaller gardens, or they're gardening on a deck or a patio or a balcony. They still want to grow plants, and I think that's part of what's behind the houseplant trend of the past few years. They still want to grow plants, but they just don't have the space to do it. And as we go through these trends, you'll see the climate environmental thread running through them, as well as the changing housing patterns thread running through them. Well, let's talk first about the big news and the thing I think gardeners are really thinking about here in Minnesota. If I live in zone 5, am I really a northern gardener? As many of you know, about 2 weeks ago, the USDA released its new version of the plant hardiness zones. For those who aren't familiar with it, plant hardiness zones are based on the lowest average low during a winter in your area. So those people who live in zone 4, which was most of Minnesota for a long time, have the average lowest low somewhere between -20 and -30. Those in zone 3, the northern part of Minnesota, have an average lowest low between -30 and -40 degrees. Now, that doesn't mean those are the lowest lows you're ever going to have. It doesn't mean, that those lows are always going to be there. So weather can change, but that's just the average lowest low. And many people in the Twin Cities and in southwestern Minnesota in this new map were moved into zone 5A. That's the top half of zone 5, which means your average lowest low is now between -15 and -20. Again, that doesn't mean that's never going to go below -20. I lived in the city of St. Paul, and I know that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I was measuring -23, -24, -22 for several days in a row in January in the middle of the city. So yes, it can still get cold. In terms of gardening, these zones are used when plant companies decide how much cold can a plant take. So you will probably, one change I think we're going to see with the new zone ratings is that nurseries will begin to carry more zone 5 plants and offering them, particularly in the Twin Cities. That's one big change we're going to see. But here's my advice. The first thing is go to the USDA map, put in your own zip code, so you know exactly whether you're zone 5A or zone 4B, because if you're around the Twin Cities area or in southeastern Minnesota or southwestern Minnesota, those zones will vary by very minute amounts. This map is much more detailed than prior zone maps. So the example I've been giving is the city of White Bear Lake has 3 zip codes that are in White Bear Lake. 2 of them are now rated for zone 5A, and 1 of them is zone 4B. They all live in White Bear Lake. The weather's not that different. So these are very minute differences in this map. And we are at the very top end of zone 5. Most of the time when they say a plant is good to zone 5 or zone 4, they're looking at the middle level of that zone. So again, choose those plants carefully, try them if you want to. I'd maybe start with the less expensive plants, but you definitely should try some plants if you feel like it. The other thing I just suggest to people is that you monitor the weather in your own yard, because we all know there are microclimates in individual gardens. Your garden might be at a low spot, or it might be in a place that gets extra sun. You might have a brick house that has a warm spot. Sort of monitor the weather around your own garden. And I really think everybody should have a rain gauge, and it's not a bad idea to have a thermometer in your own yard so you can see what the weather is there. So again, be aware that nurseries will offer more zone 5 plants, but pick and choose carefully. And many people in the urban heat island, the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, have already been planting zone 5 plants, but sometimes they die. So, because it gets too cold. Again, monitor your own weather, take a look at that map, put your zip code in, and then I'd also put in the zip codes around you to see how close you are. If you're in zone 5A, how close you are to zone 4B. And if you're now in zone 4B and you used to be in zone 4A, which a whole lot of central Minnesota is in that group, check out the zip codes around you to see just how close you are to the line. It'll help you decide how many new plants you want to try. So zone changes and climate change are huge trends that are affecting gardening. And more people are concerned about the ecological effects of their gardening. They want their gardens to welcome butterflies and bees. They want them to be the kinds of habitats that birds can use. And the one survey found that year over year, 10% more people in the National Gardening Survey every single year are concerned about planting for bees and butterflies. And that's why we're seeing many more plants advertised as bee friendly or butterfly friendly. The other thing that's going on that you'll notice is a big concern with sustainability, and particularly the use of peat in potting soil. Now, peat is a non-renewable resource, and so we can't just go out and grow more peat, and the horticulture industry uses a lot of peat. So more people are trying to find ways to fill their pots and use different potting mixes that don't necessarily rely so much on peat. So there's a couple of examples of these eco-horticulture things that you might see. One are these new pots from Proven Winners. They are made out of plants. So you rip the bottom of the pot off and the roots are exposed, and the rest of the pot can actually be planted in the planting hole or the container with the plant. And it will biodegrade, although very slowly, is my understanding. And the pots, some of the pots are actually infused with sort of a fertilizer. So they're made out of plants, and they've got a little fertilizer in them. So you can just plop them into the pot and leave them in the pot, leave them in their little container, and that will degrade slowly in your garden. Now, if you decide I don't want to plant this pot, you can recycle the pots, or excuse me, compost the pots, but only at an industrial compost facility. So it's not like it's completely biodegradable like some of the other kinds of paper plots that you'll see, but it will biodegrade eventually, especially if you put it in an industrial compost pile. So you're going to see more things to reduce the amount of plastic that we use in gardening, which is huge. And then you'll see more of these potting mixes. We have a blog post over at northerngardener.org where I talk a little bit about my experiments this past growing season using non-peat potting mixes. And they tend to come in two types. One is a coconut coir blend. And coconut coir is a byproduct of the coconut processing industry, so it's a very renewable resource. Some people say it holds too much water. I actually found it was a little on the dry side. So it's not quite the same as peat, but I did think it was a pretty good replacement, and I actually made my own mix with it. The other type of potting mix that's out as a peat replacement tend to involve what's called hydrolyzed wood fiber or wood fines. So it's basically byproducts of the lumber industry that they mix with, compost and perlite and all the other kinds of things that are in potting mixes. I didn't have as much success with that particular type of mix, but I do think that over time we're going to see more and more of these mixes, and the companies will get a little better at figuring out exactly what the proportions should be of the ingredients in order to have a really successful potting mix. So I think you'll be seeing a lot more of them. Some of them do run toward the pricey end. That's one reason I actually made my own coconut coir mix, because I could buy the coconut coir at the pet store. They actually use it for lizards and stuff for bedding material. So you can buy the blocks of cocoa coir there and then make your own. Mine worked out pretty well. Again, a little on the dry side, particularly when using it for seed starting. And I was told that if you like to make seed blocks, using those block making machines, the coconut coir doesn't work well for that at all. So we'll expect to see more ways to reduce our waste and more ways to use less peat. But the biggest thing we're seeing in terms of ecological issues with gardening is the rise of native plant cultivars or nativars. So a nativar or native plant cultivar is a hybrid or a selection of a native plant that has features that people like in their garden. Now, many native plants are just great as species just the way they are. But some people like a smaller version of the native plant, or one that's got a slightly different colored flower or a slightly different colored leaf, and that's where all of the nativars came from. There's a lot of research being done right now at Mount Cuba Center, which is run by Douglas Ptolemy of the Bringing Nature Home book and other books. He's been doing tests on nativars to see how much they still work as pollinator plants. What's the usage by insects and bees and other pollinators of these nativars as opposed to their native plants. So he's running side-by-side tests. And the handout actually includes a whole bunch of nativars that are successful nativars. But let's just look at one of the things they do sometimes is make the plant a little smaller, like this lemon meringue baptisia. And baptisia is one of the one of the genera, excuse me, one of the plant types that has had a lot of breeding work done on it. I have planted the Twilight Prairie Blues, a series of Baptisia with great success. Both as a garden plant, they were beautiful, and as a pollinator plant, they were incredible. Lemon meringue, this yellow one, did really well in the tests they had at Mount Cuba, but I planted it in my garden and it was a dud. So you kind of have to do some observations in your own garden. Generally, what they're finding with these cultivars of native plants is if you change the size, it doesn't tend to change the pollinator function much. That is, if you make it a little smaller or a little neater. But if you change the flower shape, that's going to have a problem. That's going to create more problems for pollinators. And if you change the leaf color, interestingly. But again, a lot more work needs to be done in studying these, and they're doing it again at Mount Cuba. North Dakota State University is doing some studies, and there's a study up in Vermont, and I'm sure there are other universities that are also tackling this problem. Let's talk about a couple of other Baptisias and then some other nativars that might be fun to plant. This is a new one for 2024. It's called the Grape Escape. It's a replacement for a similar plant with the same two-toned flower. It's very pretty, gets about 4 feet tall, and has this sort of two-toned flower that's very attractive to bees. Mostly bumblebees really like Baptisia. This is also another brand new one. It's called Periwinkle Popsicle. It looks actually a lot like the native in terms of coloration, but the stems are a little taller. And in the garden, what they kind of recommend is that you underplant under, near the periwinkle popsicle, because after it blooms in like June, it's a nice green plant. It has a pretty leaf shape. And if you get the black seed heads on it, Baptisia is really cool. But sometimes it's just kind of like a tall green plant. So they're suggesting this one works really well with an annual or some other later blooming perennial planted underneath it. Of course, there have been a few milkweed cultivars that have come out. The Asclepias incarnata is a great milkweed, I think. It's the rose or the swamp milkweed. It does not spread around like the common milkweed does. The Asclepias, I think it's Asclepias syriaca. This rose milkweed stays just stays put, has a beautiful pink flower, attracts a ton of pollinators. And you get the monarch eggs on it. It's wonderful. But if you like a smaller plant, there's a Cinderella milkweed. And then if you like the yellow milkweed, there's a Hello Yellow, which is a really pretty, again, very petite, very compact, nice plant in the garden. No plant has had more breeding work done on it than coneflowers. And this is ongoing. What they've discovered with coneflowers is when you do doubles, that is when you change the top of the bloom to more petals, you really lose the pollinator function. So choose the ones that have just a regular flower shape, the regular ray flower shape. One of the best performers in terms of pollinators in the Mount Cuba trials is white swan coneflower. It's also just a fabulous, fabulous coneflower. Beautiful in the garden. This is a brand new one for this year. It's called Guatemala Gold coneflower. It's all yellow. These kind of straight yellow. There's a couple of different ones out that are all yellow, both the top and the petals. And then Artisan Yellow Ombre is another one. This was an All-American Selections winner for 2023. It's 2 to 3 feet tall with a very, very long bloom time, and it's also a very heavy bloomer. I saw this in a trial garden this summer, and it's really a nice looking coneflower. So there'll be a lot of nativars out there. You just keep trying them out And you'll be surprised. I mean, a lot of them work really well in the garden, and they still attract lots of bees and butterflies. Okay, another trend we're seeing is what I call turf wars. The lawn, the American lawn is kind of under attack, and maybe for good reason. I mean, turf turf is a monoculture. You know, it doesn't provide as much for bees and other insects as other kinds of plantings. It takes an average of 70 hours a summer to mow it, you know, depending on your lawn size. It is one of the biggest contributors to pollution from lawn mowing. And then it requires fertilizing or herbicides. You know, it's kind of actually, I think it's an intense crop more than other things. And there's a lot of move to sort of move away from turf into other kinds of ground covers in lawns. Now, first things first, I do think turf is great if you have kids that want a place to play. You know, there's reasons to have turf, but there's also reasons, depending on your home situation and your landscape, to consider some alternatives. And there's a whole bunch of alternatives that are coming out right now. You may have seen this article. It got a lot of play in September in the New York Times that Cornell University has discovered an alternative to conventional lawn. Well, what they did was use this plant. It's called Danthonia. It's kind of a bunch grass, or it's just a clumping grass. It is native to 45 states, including Minnesota, so it works all over the place. But they didn't just plant this and call it a lawn. They planted this with some sedges, with some low-growing flowers, and they created, you know, maybe kind of a little mini meadow, a short meadow. So it was a lovely, lovely ground cover. It's not exactly the same as a turf, but it is definitely an option. And if folks are interested in this, I'll be happy to send you the list of the plants that they used in this lawn that they created. But the species is called Danthonia. Now, if you want just that kind of a lawn that's just a grass, you might as well just plant prairie dropseed as well. Now, prairie dropseed's a little taller. This was taken at Chanticleer Garden in Pennsylvania. It is just a area they didn't want to plant a display garden. They didn't want to mow it. It was mostly to offer a place to rest the eye in a very large landscape. So they filled it with prairie dropseed. Very simple to take care of. Once a year you mow it. Or how about a low mow fescue? This was taken at a garden tour in Washington County. The area where the fescue is planted was formerly a bunch of trees. So they took it, the trees died, they had to take them down, and they didn't want to mow it particularly. So they planted low mow fescue seeds. My sister has a good sized landscape, and they have the same issue. They have a lot of garden, and they have some turf, but they had a bunch of areas they just didn't want to bother with mowing a lot. So they planted low mow fescue seeds, and it's really turned out well. I believe you can buy the low mow fescue mix at Bachman's, and Twin Cities Seed is the company that has a mix that is, I believe, the one my sister used. But this is just, you know, much more like a turf in the sense it is a monoculture, so it's, you know, not going to be providing quite the same pollinator benefits, but it's a real option if you don't want to mow an area and you still want that kind of restful green grass look. Another option that's a replacement for turf is something called legacy buffalo grass. This is a landscape in St. Paul. It's a Japanese garden, beautiful garden. And the homeowners wanted to create sort of a visual lake using grass, but they didn't want to mow it. And they wanted it to be different from the other turf around it. So they planted this type of buffalo grass called Legacy. It's a cultivar. It gets about 6 inches tall. It flops over beautifully, and it is great for, you know, it has a beautiful look like a little lake. The neat thing about buffalo grass, and the red arrow is pointing to where the buffalo grass is, but this is spring. It hasn't come up yet. And what happens is it comes up late. So the homeowner here will wait until any weeds come up. The weeds come up way ahead of the buffalo grass. They go out and they pull the weeds, and then the buffalo grass comes in. It's basically no maintenance after that once a year weeding. And of course, if you want to keep turf, you can always put in a partial bee lawn or a full bee lawn. This is a landscape in Chaska. The homeowner had an area they didn't want to bother mowing. And so she planted clover and thyme and all the other kinds of bee lawn plants over to the side of the lawn. And it has a lot of pollinator benefit. They don't have to mow it. It's just a way to replace part of your lawn with plants. And of course, you can always just expand your garden beds. That's a great way to get rid of turf as well. Mini meadows is another option. These have gotten a lot of publicity. They can be as small as 5 by 5. This is actually at my neighbor's house in St. Paul. It's about 8 feet wide. It's probably 60 feet long. This is an older planting, and to be honest, it's gotten a little overgrown. And that's the thing, these are not no maintenance plantings. They have a lot of pollinator benefit. They do a lot of good for the environment, but you do still have to maintain them. And a mini meadow is typically a densely planted area with grasses and sedges, and then some other perennials or biennials or self-seeding annuals. The difference between this and the Cornell lawn is basically height. The Cornell lawn was all short plants, whereas this is a taller plants. Another thing that people are doing is trying to reduce waste by growing more plants from seeds. It also saves dollars. So if you are, given the price of everything, if you want to save money on your garden, probably the best way to do it is to grow your plants from seed. And plant companies are aware of this, and they are offering more plants from seed, more ornamental plants. So for instance, this is Beacon Impatiens. It's been around for a few years. There's new mixes of this and new colors of this coming out every year. If you like Impatiens, these are super easy to start. You do have to start them indoors a little bit ahead of time. Super easy to start, and they'll fill up an area. No downy mildew. It's a great Impatiens. You're also seeing a lot more coleus that are available to start from seed. The one with the 2 colors is called chocolate covered cherry, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the straight red one. This is a new coleus called Coral Candy Sun Coleus. It's an All-American Selections winner, again in 2023. The pot there has only 3 seeds that it took to fill it up. This is like a plant that grows really well from seed, and you get a big, bushy, beautiful coleus with just very few seeds. So that's one of its selling points, is it's a great plant to grow from seed. Of course, now we'll talk a little bit about small spaces and big gardens. I'm one of many people in this country who now is gardening basically on a patio, a deck. I have a small front yard, and fortunately, I'm very fortunate to have a community garden where I can grow vegetables. But like a lot of people, my garden is pretty small now. And so container plants and small plants are becoming very much a trend. And you're seeing it not only in the plants, which we're going to talk about in just a second, but also more gear is being offered for people who are growing in small spaces. Of course, you have a lot of raised beds, with both those that are ergonomic, but also there's a lot of them that offer under watering. So there's like a reservoir underneath it where you can fill it with water, so you don't have to be watering them all the time. And I will say from personal experience, figuring out how to water your plants on a deck is #1 issue. But they have lots of new planting beds that are out. And then let's say your deck is kind of small, but you still want to have containers. Well, now they're offering new ways to have your containers actually outside of the deck itself. The one on the other side is called the Plant Trap Ledge Planter. That's the one on the left, where it basically is a little shelf that slides under your railing, and you can put a container on top of it and then grow your plants outside of the deck itself. The other ones are called railscapes floating rail planters. They attach to the railings of a deck, and then you can put a container in it. It's, you know, just ways for people to expand their spaces even if they don't have much. Of course, vertical gardening continues to be a big trend, and often more of the vertical gardening apparatus are including a watering element. So this is called Mr. Stacky, and at the bottom of the planter is a reservoir, and there's a pipe that runs up the middle of it, so you can water your pots without having to be there every single day. But the biggest thing in terms of small landscaping is the shrinking of plants. There are more and more plants coming that are in really small sizes. So I'm going to go through a bunch of them. Some are going to be brand new for 2024, and some have been around a little while. If you are new to zone 5-8, you might want to try Velvet Viking Japanese maple. I believe it's listed for zone 4, but it is a Japanese maple, so, you know, a little bit careful with it. This is a Japanese maple that grows wide rather than tall. It is really dramatic. It gets 4 to 5 feet wide, or excuse me, 3 feet tall and 4 to 5 feet wide. It's very dramatic and looks great in kind of an urban landscape, or as a sort of a focal point plant in a big bed. It's really a stunning, stunning plant. There's all sorts of arborvitae and other plants that are getting smaller and smaller. Every time I show this slide, I think, put a cage on that, because we had so many bunnies last year. I think they would have destroyed this if it hadn't been covered up. But you're seeing more and more evergreens getting very, very small. This is another native plant. It's aronia or chokecherry, called low mound chokecherry. It is not, or excuse me, chokeberry. It is not brand new, but it is one that I think would be a real addition to places where you need a ground cover. And it has 4 seasons of interest. You know, it has a berry, it has a flower, looks pretty in the summer. It has a beautiful red color foliage in the fall. This is a brand new hydrangea for 2024 called Let's Dance Skyview. And these hydrangeas are just shrinking. I believe it gets 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. It is a smooth hydrangea, so a hydrangea macrophylla, which means it blooms on both new and old wood. But look at the bloom color. I mean, I just think, you know, we're never going to really get blue blooms for hydrangea here in Minnesota unless you've got some very acid soil. But this is just a pretty, pretty lilac color, and it's new in 2024. Here's another one new for 2024 called Tough Stuff hydrangea. It's Tough Stuff Top Fun. It's part of a series of hydrangea serratas or mountain hydrangeas. These are hardy to zone 4. They do bloom on old wood, but they are hardy to zone 4. And it's apparently, this plant has also got a lot of pollinator benefits as well. The bees will like it. If you like Amsonia, I love the Amsonia hubrichti, which was a perennial plant of the year many years ago, but it's a beautiful, beautiful plant, especially in the fall. There's a new one out called String Theory Amsonia, and this is a shorter version of Amsonia. It has a nicer bloom than the hubrichti Amsonia, the Amsonia hubrichti, but it has the same beautiful gold color in the fall. Even 9-barks, which can get huge, are starting to shrink. This is Lucky Devil 9-bark. I think it was new in 22 or 23 from Bailey Nurseries. It gets, I think, about 3 to 4 feet tall. And 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. It's got a beautiful gold color. And this was bred by David's Lisac. It has a companion or another 9-bark called Spicy Devil, which is the same size but has kind of a burgundy foliage. And this year for 2024, Bailey's is introducing another 9-bark from David's Leasac called Honeycomb, which is also this yellowy color, the very pretty yellow foliage, but it's a little taller, so it's more in the 5-foot tall range. Here's another one new for this year. It's a lilac called Bloomerang. So it's a reblooming lilac, and these bloomerangs have been around for a while. This is called Pur Pink. So it's kind of somewhere between purple and pink in color. It does not get big. It's like, under 5 feet tall and 3 or 4 feet wide. It would still make a nice hedge on a small property or a nice accent plant. So all of these plants are designed for smaller properties because they're tiny. And a bunch of them can also be grown in containers if you can figure out a way to overwinter them. Here's a new grass that's come out called Black Hawk's Big Blue Stem. I think it's been out a couple of years. It only gets about 5 feet tall, a couple feet wide. I think it would be a great replacement for Karl Forster grass. And unlike the regular big blue stem, which gets huge, I mean, this doesn't get that big. And it has a really pretty dark purple color. Another new grass for 23 or 24 and 24 is called Gone with the Wind Prairie Dropseed. I like prairie dropseed, although I think it's probably overplanted in certain situations, and it is because it's tough as can be. You can hardly kill it. This version has got a little more of the seed heads and flowers than the standard prairie dropseed. And so it blows in the wind, and that's hence the name. Okay, here's one. If you've ever wanted to grow a fig but didn't want to go through all of the hassle, this is a brand new fig called Fig Nominal. It only grows 28 inches tall and is meant to be grown in a container. Now, figs are a zone 7 plant, so obviously you're going to have to figure out some way to deal with it in the winter, but a 28-inch tall fig is going to be a lot easier to deal with than the standard size fig tree. It likes to be kept at 25 to 45 degrees during the winter. So I don't know, maybe a warm garage or a greenhouse or some kind of a place where you've got, or a cold attic, something like that where you could keep it over the winter. The other nice thing for us northern gardeners about Fig Nominal is, because we have shorter seasons, the fig might set fruit, but it wouldn't necessarily have time to ripen outside. But with this one, because it's tiny, small, you pick it up and bring it into your house, put it in a sunny window, and it'll ripen, ripen indoors, even as it gets colder outside. This is one of a number of fruit plants that have been introduced this year that are smaller, and there's a lot of interest in growing fruit now, and so they've created these container fruit plants. Here are a couple of others. These have been out since I think 22 or 23, called Raspberry Shortcake, which is a container grown raspberry. I have this plant. I tried it on my deck this year. You should know that it will not fruit the first year. So I'm, figuring out where to put it for the winter. Because it's not going to, even in zone 5, it's in a container, it's going to be a little bit tough. And that's one thing to remember. If you do plant things in a container and you're going to leave it outside for the winter, the plant in the container needs to be hardy to 2 zones colder than where you are. So if you live in the new zone 5, you'd go for something in zone 3. If you're in zone 4, you're looking for something from zone 2, which is going to be tough to find. So there's Raspberry Shortcake and Perpetual Blueberry. There's other ones. There's a blackberry, there's a strawberry, there's a whole bunch of these container grown fruit plants. And this is a new one. It's Midnight Cascade Blueberry. It is a weeping blueberry plant. It is listed as zone 5 hardy, but it's in a basket, so it's going to have to be put in the garage or somehow overwintered, some kind of winter protection. But it's Midnight Cascade. And then tomatoes. I just threw this in here because there's so many new patio tomatoes, so many tomatoes that are designed to be grown in containers. And I've never been a huge fan of them, but I tried this Cherry Falls tomato last year. I planted it in a pot on my deck and mine did really well. But it was also a super easy plant to start from seed. I mean, I've never had such great germination on tomatoes. And here's what happened. I gave one to my next door neighbor who's not a big gardener, and he put it in an ice cream bucket. So I gave him the plant when it was small. He put it in a 1-gallon ice cream bucket, put it out on his deck, and he harvested almost 50 tomatoes. So if you are gardening on a deck, you certainly can grow tomatoes. I mean, they're probably going to be cherry tomatoes. They're not necessarily going to be a big slicer, but you definitely can grow tomatoes on a deck. Just want to talk quickly about the sort of homestead movement, or what I call the productive plot. There's just a lot of people, especially among young gardeners, who feel worried. And one of the ways about the way the world is going, and one of the ways to combat that worry and feel a little safer, is to grow your own food, to have your own chickens, to do other things as a sort of homesteader. I don't know how many of you follow Michelle Brune. She's a writer for Northern Gardener. She's at Forks in the Dirt, and she has written a book on homesteading that is a great beginner's guide to homesteading. One of the things you're seeing in terms of trends is the industry is responding to this by coming out with more and more products that seem to work for people who want to extend the seasons, who want a homestead, including greenhouses. I think greenhouses are going to be the hot thing to have in 2024. And these are just some pictures I had from other greenhouses. This was a kit, which cost about $500. And then the homeowner did some revamping of it to set it up in her yard, but it was just basically a greenhouse kit. 507 Garden Co. is a Instagrammer. She is one of those lucky people who has a husband who's very handy. Oh, to live with someone who's handy, it would be so great. He built her that greenhouse. But I think you'll be seeing a lot more greenhouses and other gear to stretch the season, including lots of different kinds of hoop houses or hoop setups, lots of ways to cover up crops on raised beds. And I threw this one in just for my home, for the winter sowing people, of which I know we have many at the Hort Society. This was at Jenny Rose Carey's garden, who is a gardener in the Philadelphia area. But she stores all of her winter sowing containers in a cold frame on her yard and leaves them up all year long. And does starts plants in them no matter what the season is. It's a good idea. One of the other trends we're seeing is edimentals. That is plants that are beautiful and edible. So you have lots of herbs and dramatic looking vegetables and edible flowers. This one is a new one for 2024. It's called Flavorette Honey Apricot Rose. I grew a test plant on my deck, again, in a pot. It is a beautiful, beautiful rose. I did taste it. And it wasn't a super strong flavor. I think next year I'm going to put it in a sugar syrup of some kind, try to infuse the rose flavor there. So, you could sprinkle a little on a salad, and I don't think it would offend anybody. But it is just such a pretty, pretty rose. And it grew really well in a container. I am overwintering it in a container, and we'll see how it does next year. Medicinals have been very big. And again, this is part of this whole self-sufficiency, homesteading kind of movement. 6 of the top 20 gardening titles on Amazon right now are about growing medicinal herbs. And speaking of herbs, let's talk about marijuana, which is now legal in Minnesota as well as many other states. And so you will see more people growing it, more books about how to grow it, more plant. I don't know if the plants are going to be sold where, but they'll be somewhere. This is a grower setup that I happened upon on a garden tour, not in Minnesota. It was in another state, and it is typical of what you're going to have to do in Minnesota if you decide you want to grow marijuana. He had a locked greenhouse that his plants were in. Um, and the interesting thing I would say for anyone who's interested in growing marijuana on your property is I was probably 50 feet away from it, maybe a little more. You know, it's in a greenhouse. I was a ways away from it, and I'm going, you know, I smell something. And it's the same thing I smelled in the dorm in college. And so it surprised me that how much of an odor it had, even though it was not, you know, not being smoked. You know, nobody was using it. It was just growing there. Now this crop I think was flowering at the time, so it may have had a little more odor than it might normally. But you will be seeing a lot about how to grow marijuana in the future. Cut flowers. This is a trend that's been coming on for a couple of years. There are just an absolute explosion of flower farmers. It was started a little bit before the pandemic, and it's continued now. A lot of it is due to Floret Farms, this author named Erin Benzekan. She has a flower farm in Washington State. She has a TV show. She holds classes on how to be a farmer, and she's written a couple of books on flower farming. So it's just been a huge explosion in people who want to grow flowers. Now, for home gardeners, the cool thing about that is some of these cut flower, more flowers that are great as cut flowers are now being offered for sale as seeds for us. Here's a new one. It's called Double Shot Orange Bicolor. It's a snapdragon. And it's not the little kind of snapdragons that, you know, my grandma used to have around the edge of her garden. It is a big, tall snapdragon that would look gorgeous in a bouquet. And you're seeing more and more companies that offer seed mixes that are specifically for cut flowers, or even a specific type of cut flower. So zinniaseeds.com has these amazing zinnias that are in really soft, interesting kind of ombre colors, just a lot of interesting plants. And there's even a guy in Wisconsin, I don't know if you follow him on Instagram, but you might try named Sunflower Steve, who has created a very unique sunflowers, and his seeds sell out in 5 minutes every time he puts them up for sale. So a lot more cut flower mixes and cut flower seeds available for those of us who just like to grow a few for our own bouquets. The choices are much bigger than they were even a few years ago. Another trend we're seeing is that gardeners are impatient. This is a trend with the younger gardeners, and they want things to happen now. You know, they want to Google it and get it done, and that's great. It has resulted in more things you're going to see in garden centers and from places like Northern Gardener, the garden kits, garden planting plans, seed starting kits, ways for new gardeners to get into it quickly and to have something that they're really going to enjoy right away. So a lot more kit gardening happening. And also, this is a new houseplant collection that's available locally. It's at Home Depot. But what the company has done is they have curated a group of houseplants for different situations. So they have one for highlight areas, so like an atrium is what they call it. They have an office collection. They have different collections of plants, and depending on your light and what you want to use it for, you go in and you buy those plants in a group. They come in pots. They're ready to go. So it's just like instant houseplant setup. Really a fun new idea. Okay, the last bit I'm going to go through is just about color. We're going to go through fast. There's a lot of great plants with colors. Lots of new begonias in some moody types of color. Here are the two color trends I'm seeing: Barbie and spooky. They call it goth gardening, but there's a lot of bright pinks and bright colors. And then there's a lot of moody colors, dark leaves and darker blooms. It's sort of, you know, almost like a little creepy, but that's the trend that they're going for right now. Let's go through a few that we're seeing new. This is called Passion Fruit Lantana. It is a really pretty new lantana for 2024. It's got this kind of mixture of pastel colors. What is neat about this one is it grows wider than your average lantana. And so you only need a couple of these to fill an entire container. They really grow wide and they're very, very floriferous. Another more in the Barbie theme, there's Bright Sparks Pink Celosia. And celosia is a cut flower, and that's one reason it's kind of having a moment. You just see a lot of new celosia colors out there, and I've never been a huge fan of celosia, mostly because it always seemed to be such harsh colors, but now they're in pinks and light yellows and all sorts of different colors. This is called Bright Sparks Pink. It's new for this year. Of course, there's always new begonias. This one is called Limitless Sunrise. Again, it's that kind of peachy, pinky tone, the very kind of pastel tone that looks so pretty on a begonia. Lots of new hardy hibiscus out there. Some with dark leaves, some with the green leaves, all of them with these huge, beautiful flowers. This is Lilac Crush is on your left of the screen, and All Eyes on Me is the name of the plant flower on the right of the screen. These are Zone 4 hardy, I believe. The thing I love about hibiscus is there's something other than a hydrangea that blooms at the late end of the summer. And that's, it's just, you don't get that kind of splash of pink at the late end of the summer like you do with a hibiscus. And they've gotten really good in terms of being of hardiness. So that's one to consider adding to your garden. Another new pink plant, Double Play Dolly Spirea. The Double Play series of Spirea, if you like Spirea, they are wonderful. You can cut them back and you get another set of bloom in the same year. They're a great series of Spirea. Peppermint Patty Bergenia, again, we're in the pink still. That's a really dramatic, Bergenia kind of, sometimes it just looks like lettuce in the garden, but when it blooms, it can be really gorgeous. And this is a beautiful new pink one called Peppermint Patty. Now we're getting into the dark plants. Sedums, there have been dark sedums since Matrona came out many years ago, but they're continuing to come out with new ones. They start dark even when they first come up with the little cabbages you see in the spring, even those are dark. Midnight Velvet is on the right, and After Dark is on the left. These are two newer ones. And First Editions, our friends at Bailey Nursery have come up with a new hydrangea with almost black foliage. This is called Eclipse Big Leaf Hydrangea. I think the flower is gorgeous, but the foliage is really the selling point of this plant. Now, this is a Zone 5 plant, but if you dig into the materials, they say it's hardy to -10. So you better find a nice warm spot for that one. Now, that might be they're being conservative. So if you felt like, rolling the dice, this would be a fun one to do it with. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant. And I love the way they've put it in the landscape here with the white white bark of the tree, the very dark color of the Eclipse hydrangea, and then the plants around it. So that's a real stunner if you like the dark foliage. This is another celosia. This one's called Burning Embers, and it's pink on the top and dark on the bottom. And this is a new one. It's an All-American Selections plant. And then this is called Geogenanthus shalates, or Geo plant. It's got an almost purple leaf. It's actually a new, they're saying it's a new genus of houseplants. It's not exactly, the plant's been around. It's been out in the wild in Southeast Asia, but it's now in the trade. And it's a very, very distinctive leaf. It's a bit fussy about water, but if you like that dark leafed look, this is a good one. And even the veggies are getting into the dark thing. So this is called Purple Magic Broccoli. The stems are really purple, and even the head is purple as well. I do think it turns green when you cook it, though. That's all I've got in terms of plants. I did want to just give you a pitch for gardening and community. Because we have so many new gardeners, if you're in a garden club, please reach out to the new gardeners in your area. If you're not in a garden club and you're new to gardening, maybe look for one you can join. The Hort Society, I think, has a list on their website. It's just one of the best things about gardening is that we can do it together. And so I really encourage folks to be gardening with their neighbors. Every time you plant something in your yard, you're influencing your neighbors to think about, what am I planting, and what can I do with my yard? How can I make it pretty? I have planted in the front yard at a couple of different houses. It always gets you to meet more of your neighbors, and that's one of the best things about gardening. Just to say thank you all for hanging in there. I think it's right at 7:30, but I think we have time for a few questions. My website is mynortherngarden.com. You can find me on Instagram. If you have a question you'd like to ask privately, my email is mynortherngarden@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions that way or this way. So Deborah, how are we doing?
Great, we've got a few questions. I just want to encourage anyone, if you've been waiting for when you want to type in and send in your question, if you didn't want to miss anything during the presentation, now is your chance. So the first question we've got is, are municipal organic recycling programs considered industrial so that the compostable pots can go in there?
You know, I would bet they are, but you might want to ask. I mean, I think a municipal recycling plant could probably handle that, but it might be one of those questions to ask the city, because there's a lot of variation in how compost is handled in different, depending on the community.
Okay. Next question, speaking of recycling plastic, or recycling and having plastics in the yard, is there a list of garden supply stores that recycle plant pots?
Not that I'm aware of, and I would be really hesitant about, there's always a big pile of pots at like a Home Depot, and I don't want to, badmouth Home Depot, but I know that the folks at Home Depot don't recycle those pots. They put them out there for other gardeners to take if they want to take them, but they're not necessarily recycling them. That might be a good project for the Hort Society. I don't know of a list of places that will recycle the plastic.
Speaking of the nativars, are they open pollinated?
Yes. I think many of them are, because many of them are selections. Now that's now let me think about that. I think it would depend on the plant. So I guess I'm not sure is the answer on that one.
From talking about the bee lawns, if my lawn is patchy, can I add bee lawn plants or other lawn replacement plants? Will they mix with my regular lawn, or do I have to take out the existing lawn and start fresh?
I don't think, no, I don't think you have to. You could. I mean, if you want to put in a bee lawn specifically, you could go, on the handout, I linked to Metro Blooms, which has a lot of information about doing bee lawns. You certainly could just put in some seed or some plants for other kinds of plants that you want to have grow in the lawn. You don't have to take it all out and start over. It depends on how many weeds you have too, and what kind of a look you want. But yeah, I don't think you'd have to start all over.
What was the houseplant that you mentioned at the end that was the supposedly new genus? Could you back up the slides?
Okay, let me see if you're asking me to do something.
Well, if you can.
Let me see if I can do that.
Sometimes if you've already ended, it won't. Oh, good. Yep, there we go.
Geogenanthus celades is the name
Okay,
of
there we go.
it. Pronounced my botanical Latin is lacking, but that's what it looks like. I saw this at a trade show last January and took the photo at a trade show, but I know it is available. Um, it is apparently really fussy about water. It's one of those plants that if you don't water it and if you don't water it enough, like you don't want to overwater it, but if you get just one moment past where it wants water, it faints dead away. You know, it just shows you how much it is suffering really quickly. But if you keep it nicely watered, it looks like this. It's a pretty plant.
Okay, getting lots. Okay, we do have a suggestion for people who have a bunch of pots that they need to get rid of, that they're usually people who are looking for pots on buy nothing groups.
Hmm.
So if you look on Facebook or someplace like that, find a buy nothing group in your area, you'll be able to get rid of your pots, which
Yeah, that is a great suggestion. And actually, when we moved, I got on the buy nothing group and got rid of a lot of stuff. It's a great way to recycle what you have and to get other material you need.
can you suggest some Twin Cities resources for native plants?
Oh, sure. I mean, most of the nurseries carry native plants. You have to ask about them. I mean, Bachman's has a big section of native plants. Prairie Moon Nursery, if you want a mail order, is in Winona. They have a fabulous selection of native plants. And they even have them where you can order them in what they call plugs. And I've done this a couple of times where the plugs are just like, they're about 6 inches deep and they're narrow. You're getting a very small plant. So it's not like you're going to have an instant garden here. But you can put the plugs in and you can get a mixed selection of up to 39 plugs in a tray. They have all sorts of deals, but they have just about everything. Prairie Moon has been my go-to for native plants for quite a while. But I'm sure other garden centers, most of them carry natives too.
Are there any trends on the tree front that you're seeing?
Hmm. Well, I would say I have a talk about trees that I think I'm going to do in March for the Hort Society. Um, the one thing with trees that people are thinking about right now, especially because of the climate change issue, is there are some trees that may have done really well in our climate um, in the past that aren't necessarily going to do all that well in the future. So people are looking south of where you are to think, are there some native trees from just south of us that might do really well? I think the other trend in the tree world is a real consciousness about overplanting particular species. Um, the area, we live in a townhouse right now, and every single unit in the townhouse development has a maple tree in front of it. The exact same tree. I mean, some maple disease is going to come through here and kill them all. And so I think people are very conscious now about making sure you have a variety of species and maybe, if, looking a little bit south to try some of those trees.
Okay. Um, just looking for anyone else. Who's your favorite online seed provider?
Well, I buy from a number of different seed providers. I really like Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah because it's somewhat local. I sometimes buy from Botanical Interest Seeds. I think they have really nice flower seed. They also have great information on their seed packets. They're a good one. I, I, I buy sometimes from Burpee because sometimes they have newer varieties that aren't around. For instance, I didn't mention this in the talk, but there's a new butternut squash coming out called Butter Baby, and it's just a smaller butternut squash that grows really well up a trellis. So I want to try that next year. So I ordered it from Burpee because they had it. So Seed Savers Exchange, Botanical Interest, sometimes Renee's Garden is another one that I order from. Um, yeah, so those are the main ones. You know, your seeds have gone up in price quite a bit, I think. They're still a bargain, but they've gone up a little bit. So I'm conscious about how much shipping I want to pay. So maybe, you know, 2 or 3 at the most that I would order from.
Okay, since you mentioned the edible rose, um, are there any specific roses to grow for rose hips that you would suggest?
Oh, oh, I'd have to think. I'd have to think about that. You know, um, any of let's think the bush roses. What am I thinking of? The more shrubby roses might have better hips on them. I'd have to think about that one. Um, maybe we'll put some on we'll add some to the plant list because I don't have any at the top.
Okay. And just to remind everyone, you will be getting the handout when we send you the link to the recording of the webinar.
Right.
So don't worry that you don't have it in your hot little hands. It will be there soon. All right. That just about wraps it up. What are some hardy drought-resistant plants for beating sun?
Well, I just go look at your natives. Those are the ones that'll do really well. I mean, I've had good luck with anise hyssop. Um, some of the other, you know, the coneflowers do okay. I mean, I think it's just look to your native plants. Those are the ones that are going to do the best in really hot sun.
Okay. Oh my goodness, there are more. I needed to scroll down and find more questions. We have a suggestion for people looking for natives to look for to prairie restoration.
Yes.
Um, Also, if you are lucky enough to live in Coon Rapids, they have a recycling program for the planter pots.
Oh, that's great.
In northern Minnesota, people are suggesting Shoreview natives,
Okay.
and in Otsego, Minnesota native landscapes.
Yep.
So there we go. Let me just check. Lots of thank yous.
Oh, thank you.
Any tip, okay, any tips for continuing to keep container soil safely recharged for edible crops?
Um, I th I think I'm not completely sure what they're asking, but you know, I do save my potting soil for year to year. What I tend to do is throw it out onto a tarp altogether, add in a bunch of compost, maybe a little bit of an organic fertilizer, and then if I feel like it's getting heavy, maybe a little perlite or something like that. Um, but I just keep adding compost. And if it's really diseased, if there's a really diseased plant, then maybe it's time for that one to go away, not use it anymore.
Okay. And our last question for the night is any suggestions for the pond front?
Ponds?
Yes,
Oh,
ponds.
ponds. Okay. Um, I wish I had a pond. um, you know, again, the natives, I will say, subscribe to Northern Gardener because there's an article coming out in, I think, the spring or summer issue of 2024 about how to do a landscape restoration around a waterfront, a body of water. So again, sort of go with the natives. And if you had a pond, I'd maybe think about getting someone who's more of a professional in to help you. Because those are
Uh,
good.
We just had a go to the Minnesota Water Garden Society.
Oh, yes, great. Yes, they have
Just
great information. They also have a great tour in the summer. If you're in the Twin Cities area, the Water Garden Society tour is really good.
so thank you everyone for all of your questions. Thank you, Mary, for coming
Yeah.
tonight. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. After the webinar, you will receive a survey. We would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within the next 7 business days with a link to view a recording of today's webinar and a handout with the listing of all of the plants that Mary talked about. On behalf of the Minnesota State Horticultural Society, thank you for joining us today and stay safe.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.